And welcome to this edition of Ask 9. I'm Jim Mertens. Becky has the day off, and it was a huge decision that was heard around the world that came out of the U.S. Supreme Court. It is an amazing day when it comes to tariffs, and it's a pivotal day when it comes to this administration. So we want to take a closer look at the Supreme Court striking down the president's far-reaching global tariffs, handing him a stinging loss, and then he had a real furious attack on the court that really, in a lot of ways, Republicans and particularly President Trump helped create. Trump said he was absolutely ashamed by some of the justices in this decision. The decision was 6-3 against him. They called him disloyal. He called them disloyal to the Constitution and also said they're lapdogs, saying their decision is incorrect, but it doesn't matter because he says we have very powerful alternatives.
I am allowed to cut off any and all trade or business with that same country. In other words, I can destroy the trade. I can destroy the country. I'm even allowed to impose a foreign country destroying embargo. I can embargo. I can do anything I want, but I can't charge $1.
So that is the president talking about the fact that the Supreme Court is tying his hands in some ways in regards to international trade. And he says it's absolutely impossible to believe that this would be done, and it's only going to impact the American people. Now, the majority of the Supreme Court found that it is unconstitutional for the president to unilaterally set and change tariffs because taxation power clearly belongs to Congress. This is according to the majority in this 6-3 decision. They say, Chief Justice John Roberts writing that the framers did not vest any part of the taxing power in the executive branch. And so it was important to point this out because of the fact that it has a direct impact on how Congress operates. So we were interested in regards to what Congress's reaction to this whole thing is. And so the senior senator of Iowa, Chuck Grassley, a Republican, issued this statement. And he says, President Trump is a very skilled negotiator, and I want him to continue to be successful in expanding market access. He's already succeeded in deals, getting some American beef into Australia, ethanol and beef into England, rice into Japan, and pork into Taiwan. Senator Grassley continues to say, I appreciate the work he and his administration are doing to restore fair reciprocal trade agreements, but he says, I urge the Trump administration to keep negotiating while also working with Congress to secure longer-term enforcement measures so we can provide expanded market opportunities and certainty for Iowa's family farmers and businesses. And the president talked a little bit about that.
Alternatives will now be used to replace the ones that the court incorrectly rejected. We have alternatives, great alternatives. Could be more money. We'll take in more money.
So that's the president talking about the fact that he is undaunted. The Treasury Department actually collected more than $133 billion from the import taxes that the president has imposed under the Emergency Powers Law as of December. Let me say that again, $133 billion. That's from federal data. Now, the impact over the next decade has been estimated at some $3 trillion would have been coming into the coffers of the American government. I can also point out the tariffs decision does not stop the president from imposing duties under other laws, and those have more limitations on the speed and the severity of Trump's actions because in a lot of ways what they do is they have Congress make sure that once the president does impose these tariffs, there's oftentimes a time limit, and during that period of time limit, Congress takes action on whether they agree or they don't agree. But the president said that he would still allow to change and charge much more than he had before. So that's his plan going forward.
Therefore, effective immediately, all national security tariffs under Section 232 and existing Section 301 tariffs, they're existing, they're there, remain in place, fully in place, and in full force and effect. Today, I will sign an order to impose a 10% global tariff under Section 122 over and above our normal tariffs already being charged.
So there you have it, the president undaunted and saying that he is prepared to continue with tariffs internationally. The Trump administration had argued the tariffs are different because they're a major part of his approach to foreign affairs. So since it's more than just economy, it has to do with foreign affairs, the administration says it's an area where the courts should not be second-guessing the president. Small businesses, though, are celebrating the ruling. The National Retail Federation says it provides much needed certainty. That's one of the big issues when it comes to businesses and when it came to tariffs. With the tariff threats, it was uncertain how businesses could plan in the coming year. They weren't quite sure what was going to happen next. And that makes the markets and that makes businesses very jittery. And KCR and GTV9's Libby Randall talked with an economist, Ann Villamil, of the Tippie College of Business at the University of Iowa. She has great insights when it comes to the impact of these tariffs and the economy as a whole.
For those who may not be keeping up, what is this big decision by the Supreme Court? What does this mean for tariffs in a broad sense for our country?
Well, this is actually a very big decision. We've been expecting it, but there's been a lot of uncertainty about both the timing and which way it would go. So, as I think everyone knows, when President Trump came back into office, he imposed tariffs on many countries. And he used something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, which was an emergency law to induce countries to reach agreements with the U.S. So what happened under this decision by the Supreme Court is that certain tariffs have been voided. And what that means is that the U.S. may have to pay the importers back. And so there are a number of issues here that are important. Let's start with money first. One of the things the president said is that tariffs are beautiful because they're raising revenue for the country. And we have a very big fiscal deficit and outstanding debt. So under this ruling by the Supreme Court, the U.S. may have to pay back about $170 billion, half of the tariff revenue that came in last year, to importers. Now, the president didn't like this decision, but there have been 3 separate studies that indicated that the incidence of the tariffs were falling mostly on people in the U.S., businesses and individuals, so at least we would be paying a substantial part of it back within the U.S. But even Justice Kavanaugh in the decision said figuring out how to repay these people, the $170 billion, is going to be very difficult. So the reciprocal tariffs were imposed on countries to the tune of about 10 to 41% for countries that failed to reach new trade agreements with the United States. So in some sense, it was a tool to get various countries to the bargaining table. And the president said, in addition, it's raising revenue. And the Supreme Court has indicated in a 6-9 decision that it is struck down.
Now, what might this mean for consumers moving forward? Can we expect prices to go up, down, stay the same? What sort of insight can you offer on that?
So the question on the effect of consumers is a good one. In my view, what we need more than anything is more certainty in economic policies. And so despite the fact that the Supreme Court has struck this down, the administration is indicating that they'll try to find other ways to impose these tariffs. So that means, that we don't have certainty yet. I think this is one of the key things. One of the biggest points is whenever we talk about commerce, international trade, whether to start a business, everyone needs to know what the rules of the game are, particularly with respect to long-term investments. So we don't seem to be getting clarity on that.
And that, of course, impacts not only businesses, but think of what the biggest businesses what the biggest businesses are in Iowa, I should say, and that's farming, of course. And so the Iowa Democrats shortly after the president's speech, had farmers react to the Supreme Court decision. And we heard from Ryan Marquardt, who's a Madison County farmer, and Berlene Wabater, who is a Tama County farmer, and pretty much their reaction to this decision today.
10% across the board. Like, you just kind of open Pandora's box when you do that. Like, you don't know what retaliatory tariffs you're looking at then. Like that is almost scarier than what we have now, because you're just dialing down on a policy that isn't working, and you're just doubling down on something that isn't working and is hurting both farm families, and just families in general across the state of Iowa. And doubling down is going to do us no favors.
We have the USMCA needs to be reviewed coming up, by this summer. And I mean, we're seeing Mexico and Canada, maybe they wanted to have a relationship in the past, and now they're getting serious about building a relationship and leaving us out of it. And they're not going to be the only countries doing that.
So there is a lot of concern of what comes next, and also the long-term impact as far as the tariffs that were already imposed, with countries now making alliances for tariffs and for buying products that doesn't involve the United States. So there's a real fear that what has already happened is going to have a long-lasting impact for the United States trade and for farmers. President Trump long been vocal about the case, calling it one of the most important in U.S. history, and saying a ruling against him would be an economic body blow to the country, because not only does it mean that some of these tariffs have to end, but also does the money have to be returned, and you heard about that. And you also heard the president finding other ways to add tariffs. So this story is not done yet, economically certainly not done, but it did show the Supreme Court was willing to rule against the president. And that's a big deal, because the Supreme Court has been over and over again building an even stronger executive branch when it comes to the judiciary, the executive branch, the president, and the legislative branch, which is Congress. And so we've really seen the Supreme Court in the past side with the White House, but once again, this was a 6-3 decision, with the Chief Justice writing the decision, saying that the president overstepped his bounds. So obviously, we're going to be covering this a lot more in the days ahead, and we're always looking forward to anything you have to say. If you got any questions, just message KCRG on Facebook or just email us. It's Ask9, and we're on every weekday from 5:30 until whenever, streaming right after the 5 o'clock news. Becky Phelps always being here, making sure that everything runs smoothly. She allowed me to do this on my own today, and hopefully it wasn't too much of a disaster, because you just don't want that. But we got all the information that we've got. We've got continuing coverage, of course, on this story on KCRG TV9 News at 6 and as well as at 10. So thanks for joining us for Ask9.